Hey everyone, it's Allison Gill. This episode of Jack was recorded right before the charges against Donald Trump were unsealed. So please enjoy this episode about the lead up to the charges and the announcement of the indictment. But look for a second bonus episode of Jack later today, where Andy and I will go over the charges. We'll see you then.
I signed an order appointing Jack Smith.
And nobody knows you.
And those who say Jack is a fanatic.
Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor.
Wait, what law have I broken?
The events leading up to and on January 6th, classified documents and other presidential records.
You understand what prison is?
Send me to jail.
Hey everybody, welcome to Jack, the podcast about all things special counsel. It is Sunday, June 11th. It's the week 28, okay, 28 weeks in, and I'm Allison Gill, your co-host.
And I'm Andy McCabe. Allison, a couple of things happened this week. In fact, a couple of things happened in the last hour. But of course, we're talking about the fact that special counsel Jack Smith has indicted former President Donald Trump on 7 federal charges in Miami on Thursday night. So we're going to go over what we know about those charges, plus the absolute fire hose of news about the documents case that we've gotten since the last episode.
Yeah, 100%. We learned there was just so much this week. Grand jury moving down to Miami, a flood in the server room where the Mar-a-Lago surveillance footage was stored, Donald's lawyers having received a target letter for Donald last week, then meeting with Jack Smith in D.C., then quitting, and then some more details about that audio recording of Donald waving the Iran document around during a meeting in 2021. And Andy, I guess the best way to approach this news week is to kind of do it chronologically to what led us up to the charges, and then we can discuss the charges, and then we can talk about the other news that was happening in the January 6th investigation. and I mean, there's just so much. So why don't we kick it off with the target letter, because that's a big deal. And you know, I've been everywhere I've been doing appearances and hits, Andy, I always say, look, 999 times out of 1,000, if you get a target letter, you're going to get indicted. I know one guy who got a target letter that didn't get indicted, but I only know the one guy.
Well, you are correct about that. I think you've worked the math well. The target letter is a very sad day for anyone. And in this case, that consistency seems to be holding. Now, I think it's, we hear a lot about these things in different investigations, target letter, and then we hear sometimes people are referred to as a subject of investigation. What's the difference? Basically, anyone can be a subject of a federal investigation if their behavior comes within the scope of the investigation, right? That's a very low standard. That's kind of the official DOJ definition in the DOJ manual. But a target is defined as someone who the prosecutors already have significant evidence of your guilt, and you are essentially a presumptive defendant. You haven't been indicted yet, but everybody is basically presumed that you will get indicted. So that's why when that letter drops, when it shows up at your house, you can pretty much count on the fact that you're going to be getting indicted. And not only that, you're probably going to be getting indicted pretty soon, because they don't typically send those out until the very end.
Yep. And shortly after that, the Trump attorneys, the lawyer team, the Blunderdome down there, decided to get together and go and meet with, well, first they demanded a meeting with the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and the Attorney General Merrick Garland. And they're like, yeah, no, you can meet with Jack Smith and this other high-level official from the Deputy Attorney General's office.
Yep.
And so they went and met. And during that meeting, from my understanding and from some reporting, additional reporting from Hugo Lowell and from sources at CNN, ABC, I mean, just reported everywhere, they asked not to indict their client, just generally what you do. But they also came up with a little bit of prosecutorial misconduct. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But that meeting happened. But then the New York Times reported that Trump's lawyers met with Jack Smith and a high-level official from the DAG office, because he, like I said, they wanted to meet with Merrick Garland. No, but you're going to meet with the person who's actually running the investigation. And during that meeting, they raised prosecutorial misconduct, and then they also asked the Department of Justice to not indict their client. And this prosecutorial misconduct, Hugo Lowell teased this story out and got the exclusive. Basically what happened is, and I wanted to ask you about this because this just sounds like a benign conversation to me.
Sure.
But Jay Bratt called Walt Nauta's lawyer in and said, we need to come and talk to you. Can't be over the phone. They sat him down. Jay Bratt told him they were going to charge Walt Nauta, his client, with false statements and said, we want your client to cooperate. And Nauta's lawyer then denied the false statements vehemently. And then at some point in the conversation, Jay Bratt brought up the fact that Walt Nauta's lawyer had recently applied for a federal judgeship. And what they're insinuating is that Bratt was somehow trying to coerce Nauta's lawyer by saying, maybe hinting like, I can give you a hand with your judgeship application, even though no one at the DOJ has any sway or any way to do anything like that. I think this might have just been, and Hugo Lowell brought up this possibility, might have just been part of a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really strange turn of events or maybe non-events. So in that, in those facts you just laid out for us, all the way up to the mention of the lawyer applying for the federal judgeship, everything before that is totally normal, right? Prosecutors and defense attorneys have these conversations every day in cases where prosecutors are trying to convince defense attorneys to bring their clients in and legitimately cooperate. So all that is totally normal course of business. Now, if, and I say this because we don't have any proof of this whatsoever at this point, but if Jay Bratt made this comment referring in some way to the defense attorney's existing consideration for a federal judgeship in the most innocuous, meaningless way, you could imagine him saying something like, listen, this is in the interest of justice. It's the right thing to do to bring your client in. He has important information that's important to a major case. You appreciate how important this case is. I mean, you're somebody who's actually considering being a judge, full stop. Like that's a reference to his desire to be a judge, but in basically the most innocuous way possible. The other end of the spectrum is he says, hey, look, I know you're applying for a federal judgeship, and if you don't bring your client in to cooperate, I'm going to put a kibosh on that application and you'll never be a judge. That's, of course, terrible. That sounds very coercive and improper. Either way, this is an element, this is something for the department to investigate, right? They hand this over to the Office of Professional Responsibility in the Department of Justice, and they look into allegations of misconduct on the part of prosecutors. Depending on what they find, maybe it's at the not so bad end, maybe it's closer to the really bad end, they would then take action against Jay Bratt. My point in this long explanation is none of that would result in eliminating or dismissing or ending this case. Because what do we know? We know that this was a conversation with the attorney, not with the actual witness or the attorney's client. We also know that the client is actually not cooperating at this point. So there's nothing really happened here except a comment, an alleged comment by Jay Bratt, which honestly, if he said that, it was an impertinent thing to bring up. It was a mistake he should not have. Whether or not he'll be disciplined for it in any way, who's to say? That needs to be investigated. But I think the Trump team throwing this out there as like their first line of defense in this unbelievably significant and serious case is really just a bunch of hot air. It's not going to get them anywhere. Even if it is as bad as they say, it's not really going to have that much of an impact on the case. But it's a convenient thing for them to talk about because honestly, they don't have anything else to talk about here. Right.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that his defense has been blown. Even the defense of, declassified with my mind or didn't know I had them, even though those were blown wide open by the battle with the 11th Circuit, because none of that actually matters. The declassification status of these documents is a red herring, as both the Department of Justice and the 11th Circuit said. That was their terminology.
That's right.
And it's such a flimsy defense that he wouldn't officially state it to the court as being a defense. Because, the DOJ asked, tell us here in court right now in writing, are you saying that these are declassified? Well, we're not going to use that defense at this time. But his public defense, which, I'm sure he's just trying to get this tried in the public here before it goes to court. was that he declassified everything in his mind. That got blown apart by this audio tape we're going to talk about in a little bit. So he's got nothing left other than prosecutorial misconduct, and that's all that he's going to pound on for days.
Yeah, and that fits right into his main kind of approach on everything.
Narrative, yeah.
Is to demonize the prosecutors, demonize the FBI, try to point the finger, oh, look how they're not fair, it's not fair to me. And honestly, it's working. It's working with the people that like him and who follow him and support him. Those people, his supporters on the Hill are all kind of aping that same language today. They're drawing these connections. I guess it's not actually a connection, but they're comparing the announcement of this indictment or the revelation of this indictment yesterday to the handing over of the FBI of some piece of informant information, unvetted informant information or unconfirmed informant information about an allegation against Joe Biden years ago. Of course, it happened on the same day. They must be connected. It's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And I have to say that in all the crazy and defamatory and slanderous things that are being said about the FBI, with everything that we know in this case so far, which is a fair amount, right? We've been 28 episodes in here. There's not a single piece of information, not one, that actually points to misconduct or, bad conduct or political motivation behind this investigation. Okay, I get it. If you're a hardcore Trump supporter, you don't like this investigation because it makes your guy look bad and it's disappointing. Sorry about that. But there's actually not any facts that support any of these allegations. And the idea that the FBI is some hotbed of left-leaning activists who are out to get Republicans, it's absurd. It is such a conservative place, the FBI. Generally, the culture is very conservative. I don't know how people in the FBI vote because you don't really talk about that, but I would strongly guess that many of them vote for Republican candidates. I mean, it's just nonsense, and it's getting hard to listen to, but I guess we have to be prepared to hear a lot more of it.
Yeah, well, we went through it in the Mueller investigation. We went through it with the Russia, with Crossfire Hurricane and all of the attacks from the person in the White House at the time against the intelligence community. It was difficult to watch.
Yeah.
When all that happened. So it's going to happen again. I know they're better prepared for it. We know for a fact that Jim Jordan and Donald Trump and Trump's lawyers were trying to get the names of all of the people on Jack Smith's team. They were trying to get identify them. And Jack Smith was like, no, you may not. And they keep trying. And it's just because they want to publicly attack these folks. I mean, we saw it, better than anybody what happens to people who investigate the former president of the United States.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I know. And that's what we're going to see happen here. So don't get caught up in the hype, I guess. And our listeners know that. Always ask yourself, what do we actually know? What are the facts that we have that you could base that opinion or that allegation on? And in terms of this misconduct stuff, other than what we've talked about this allegation about Jay Bratt and Walt Nauta's lawyer, we haven't heard anything. Nothing. Zero. So anyway.
Yeah, no, agreed. And from people I've spoken to who know and have worked with Jay Bratt, that's not the kind of person that he is. He's a very cool-headed, even-tempered guy. Anyway, we'll see what ends up happening. Hugo Lowell has said that the National Security Division knows about this prosecutorial misconduct allegation, and they take it very seriously, as anyone should. So it will be investigated. It will not kill the case. I personally don't think so, and I'm glad to hear that you agree. You have a lot more experience on these things than I do. All right, we have so much more to get. We haven't even gotten to the charges, my friend. So we got a little bit more to get to. I want to talk about this pool party, this potential pool party conspiracy that might have happened, but we have to take a quick break. Everybody, stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. All right, Allison, here we go. We're going to roll on to the pool party. And this is, I'm sure we're going to make a lot of jokes about this as it goes on, but the story is really kind of amazing. CNN had exclusive reporting that Jack Smith was asking witnesses in the grand jury about a pool draining incident. So apparently the maintenance man that helped Walt Nauta move boxes accidentally flooded the server room where the Mar-a-Lago surveillance video was being stored. Okay, so step back 2 steps here. So maintenance guy who is involved in moving the boxes, shifting the boxes, the game that was being played with where the boxes are located, also was in charge of draining the pool and just happened to do so in a way that took the water from the pool and put it into the server room. So let's keep in mind, the Washington Post also reported that the same maintenance worker called the Mar-a-Lago IT guy in July and asked questions about how long the surveillance footage was stored and whether or not it was waterproof. No, I added that last part. That's not true. I just added that.
Well, apparently the servers were not damaged. But I mean, there are entire industries dedicated to saving data on servers that have gotten water on them. So I'm very surprised that this is if this was not like we have to say this could have just been an accident. It could have literally been the same guy who talked to the IT guy about the surveillance tapes that was happening to drain the pool a few months later, and the water happened to be accidentally sent to that server room. Could be coincidence. Okay, we have to, we just have to say that that's a possibility. But to think that you would be able to destroy this information, it's totally consistent with their basic gang that couldn't shoot straight approach to this entire investigation, right? So it could have been an accident. It seems not to have been significant because no one is actually saying that, oh yeah, this is where this data was. Now it's no longer accessible because of the flood in the server room. In fact, they're saying, as you said, that the servers weren't even damaged. So I love talking about it because it's hilarious, but it's probably not really a thing in the overall kind of, spectrum of this case and so many significant developments that we have seen and heard about. At the end of the day, this is, I see it as more of just kind of like a, can you believe it sort of anecdote. Yeah. And by the way, we should talk about kind of what went on during that, that whole moving of the boxes situation, because we just found out, Andy, that Walt Nauta has been indicted alongside Donald Trump. This news is breaking pretty much right this second as we are recording this. And so now, that we know that the maintenance guy, because here's my thought, right? Maintenance guy has his own lawyer, John Irving. Walt Nauta and Taylor Budowich and Kosh Patel and a few other people, some Oath Keepers, Kelly Meggs, all share a same lawyer. And now both of these lawyers, John Irving and Stanley Woodward, I think his name is, I can't remember, are both paid for by the Trump Save America PAC. But it's of note, I think, that we have a Walt Nauta indictment and not a maintenance man indictment that we know of, because they don't have the same lawyer. You can't really share a same lawyer if one person is cooperating against the other. So this kind of tells me that we might have a cooperator in this maintenance man. But again, this is all speculation. We don't really know. It's not like he switched lawyers at the last minute. That's usually an indication that somebody is cooperating if they're sharing a lawyer with somebody they're about to flip on. We saw it happen in Fani Willis's case with the fraudulent electors. But, Walt Nauta is caught on that surveillance footage moving boxes, at least we know, back into that storage room the day before they have Corcoran go and search through it, the day before they have the FBI come down to retrieve the documents Corcoran had searched for in that room. Yeah.
Nauta's on the video moving the boxes around. He's also the guy who knew exactly the time and place that Corcoran was going to search. He's the guy who gave Corcoran access to the boxes. He had the key to the room, and Corcoran had to go to him before he could get in. So he's in a very curious spot there. Now you layer on top of that what we know about his efforts to cooperate. So he did come in and was interviewed under the pretense of cooperating with the government. But we know that that ended when the government determined that he had misled them. So he tried to cooperate, didn't really work out. Sounds like the government put more pressure on him, more, maybe even including this alleged conversation about the judgeship. And ultimately, he decided not to cooperate. We had heard through a lot of reporting in the last few weeks that his attorney had basically cut off all contact with DOJ. So that's a good sign that this thing has not worked out. Now,
that sounds like the dumbest thing to do, though. I mean, which makes me really question the not just because he's being paid by the Trump Save America PAC, but the integrity of this lawyer or his knowledge. It's
really, this is like Cooperator 101. When you bring someone in who's facing exposure in the case you're investigating, and you're trying to get them to cooperate on some more significant target, and they decide, okay, I'm going to come in. That's called a proffer session. The subject of investigation comes in with his or her lawyer, and he sits down with typically two FBI agents and the line prosecutor. And at the very beginning of that meeting, the terms of this agreement are very clear. It is, you have to tell the government everything you know about not just the questions they have for you about this case, but any other criminal activity you might have been involved in. And if we determine you are both useful and truthful, then you can get what's known as a cooperation agreement, which would basically say you agree to plead guilty to some one of the crimes that you've admitted you were involved in return for the prosecutors requesting at the end of the whole procedure, when you're ultimately sentenced on the one thing you pled guilty to, prosecutors will ask the judge to downwardly depart on your sentence, so sentence you to less than what you deserve. The problem is, if at any point in that process, the prosecutors and the agents figure out that you're lying and you haven't gone all the way in and fully committed to telling the truth, you're hosed. You get no deal, you get no agreement, there's no easy plea, and there's certainly no sentence reduction later. And the prosecutors can then use everything that you said in the proffer sessions against you if you ever take the stand. So to come in and not go and to do it, but not do it all the way or not do it well enough to actually get a cooperation agreement is the dumbest thing you can possibly do. And the prosecutors will tell you that at the first meeting, like, if you're not going to really do this, if you think you can lie to us, just get up and walk out right now, because it's really going to hurt you in the long run. And that may be what happened here to Walt Nauta.
Yeah, maybe, because we know he came in and said, I didn't do anything. And then they confronted him with some video footage and said, yeah, you did. And then he told him, Trump told me to move those. And then he clams up, Yeah. And if it weren't for the clam up and full on investigation where he, maybe becomes a target now instead of a subject or a witness, now we find the text messages, his text messages. We get all this other information. We find out about the conversations that he had with Donald Trump, perhaps. So now had he cooperated, the case might not be as strong as it is, but you never know. It might be stronger. He could have given some information that they had no idea about. That's just how the cookie crumbles.
Who knows? And had he cooperated, maybe we never get to the maintenance worker. But the problem for him is he didn't cooperate. He's not cooperating. He just got indicted. And now they have, maybe, we don't know this for a fact, but maybe that maintenance worker is cooperating and you're getting, 80, 90% of what you needed from Nauta, you're now getting from this maintenance worker who's even less culpable. He's even lower on the food chain. So that's a good thing for the prosecutors. Now, I will say it's always possible to cooperate after you've been indicted. It's a little harder. The benefit to you as a defendant is not quite as rich, but nevertheless, sometimes it takes an indictment for some defendants to wake up and realize, I really need to get on the government side here if I'm going to have the best result for myself. That could still happen. Nauta's been indicted. He may decide to change his mind about cooperating. But if he does, then the government is stuck with a problem because he's lied to them in the past, which means if you use him as a witness, you have to expose to the jury that he's lied to the government before, which raises the question of he might be lying to the jury now. So it's hard to rehabilitate a cooperator who you have already proven lied to you in the past. It's not impossible, but it is tough. and it requires a jury that's going to be very forgiving.
But looking at these charges, I don't know that the DOJ necessarily even needs this guy as a cooperator anymore. Not at least not Walt Nauta, because these are some very serious. This conspiracy to obstruct is under 1512, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But these are serious charges. We're talking about 20-year maximum sentence charges. False statements carry a 5-year maximum sentence. We're going to talk about all of these individual title and codes that were reported by ABC News. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about, I had mentioned the same lawyers for, that Stanley Woodward guy. I hope I'm getting that name right. I'm sorry. I'm doing it off the top of my head. Somebody I'm sure will send in a correcting email if I'm getting it wrong. But that, this lawyer was shared by Kash Patel, Walt Nauta, and of course, Taylor Budowich. Now, Taylor Budowich testified in Florida this week. He talked about a letter that Trump wanted to release in 2022 saying, I've given everything back to the archives. But apparently Taylor Budowich didn't feel comfortable releasing that statement. And there were several Trump aides who weren't comfortable releasing that statement because they didn't believe it was true. So they asked him about that. And that's interesting because I thought for a second that maybe it wasn't, maybe they were just questioning Taylor Budowich and, Walt Nauta and everybody because these lawyers are paid by the Save America PAC. And maybe this was probably part of Jack Smith's probe into Trump's super PACs, because that's a separate investigation that's going on right now. I mean, it's tied to all of them, but it's another track that he's looking at. But then he was asked about that document. And then, Andy, we learned that Jay Bratt and a guy named Harbach were down there in Miami on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, it was the prosecutor, it was Harbach, but no witnesses were going in and out of the grand jury room. And that led us to sort of wonder, are they voting on a true bill today? Because the Independent UK paper said that they were going to be voting on a true bill on Thursday, but that we were going to be doing it in D.C., and no other U.S. outlet was picking up that story. So either they just accidentally got the Thursday right, or they had the Thursday right. It was just a wrong venue, and nobody else could corroborate.
And the crossfire of media sources, it's like never ends. But
right.
Yeah, I that was really fascinating watching that all day yesterday. We're all trying to decode, I think most of us didn't really understand the significance of a grand jury in Miami until we heard about the appearance by Taylor Budowich the day before. So it raised this question of like, wow, what's going to happen here? Who's going to indict the case? Trying to figure that out. In my calculation, I thought, it may end up going in Miami, but probably not for a while, because you think about all of the witnesses that we have seen appear in D.C., we know testified here in D.C. based on the privilege litigation and everything else. That's a ton of information that has to be basically put in front of the Miami grand jury. You can do that by...
Yeah, because we learned this week from the New York Times, it was kind of buried in the story, that 20 Secret Service agents, maybe a little more than 20 Secret Service agents, had testified to the D.C. grand jury in the documents case in recent months. I mean, there's just a lot that you have to bring in all the staff members and all the Secret Service folks and everybody. So it's a lot of info.
It's a ton, and all the transcripts of all the testimony has to be given to the new grand jury. A lot of it is read to them. So these are processes that take time. And I think we were assuming, because we just learned about the Miami grand jury, it must be fairly new. I think actually what happened is they've probably been doing that for weeks, very quietly, off the radar, so to speak. And so they were in a position to get a vote yesterday. And one that, really surprised us in terms of timing.
Yeah, it was because I was in the car driving home. It was about 7:30 p.m. on Thursday night. And I get the ding on the phone, and it's Donald posting to Truth Social that he has been indicted in the Boxes hoax, which is his new name for this documents case. And so then I start looking around. Okay, and all NBC reporting, Donald says he's being indicted. Right. Donald says he's being indicted. And I remember what happened when Donald said he was being indicted the last time. He said, Tuesday I'm going to be, and it was wrong. So I was trying to be skeptical about what Donald posts on Truth Social. But then the reporting started to come in closer to 8 p.m. And that's when, we all put out our official reports that Donald had been indicted. Now,
I finished up a hit at CNN. I'm trying to remember how this actually worked. I think I was on the 6. I had a couple of blocks in the front of Wolf's show at 6. I probably got out of there about 6:30. I was going to stay if the indictment happened, but it hadn't happened by then. Nobody thought it would. So I drove all the way home, which is a bit of a haul for me. And I was in the house maybe 10 minutes. And I look up at the TV and it's like, Donald Trump's been indicted. Sure enough, phone rang. And they're like, can you please get in your car immediately and come back in? So I just turned around, went back in and stayed till midnight. But yeah, it was, it's been it's been a crazy week on a lot of ground. So, so that resolves the whole Miami versus DC venue issue as well, which I think is really fascinating. I think this is another example of an issue that the prosecutors have probably really been suffering over for months. Probably a lot of research, a lot of conversations, a lot of high-level meetings to determine where to bring this case. And just to go through the math of it a little bit, obviously, in terms of jury pool, if you're a prosecutor, you want the case in D.C. I mean, D.C. voted overwhelmingly for Biden. So just that indicator alone says you're more likely to get jurors who have a negative, opinion about Donald Trump. So that's a positive of D.C. There are, in terms of where venue is, of course, I'm sure everyone knows the Constitution requires when you're charged with a federal crime, you have to be charged in the place where the crime happened. Now, that's a little bit vague, right? If it's a crime that occurred over a long period of time and multiple acts, there are questions about what does where it happened mean where it started or where it finished. And there's no really clear answer to that. You just kind of have to feel through each case on the facts. There is a good argument to say that the crime of taking the documents, knowingly and intentionally taking documents you shouldn't have taken, started here in D.C., the taking being moving them to Florida. That is made a little bit more complicated by the fact that Trump left D.C. early. If you remember, on the day of Biden's inauguration, rather than sticking around and doing the handoff that every other president has ever done, Trump just got out of town. He gave that little speech at the airport out at Andrews and got on Air Force One and left. So technically, by leaving before Biden was sworn in, Trump was still president, which could have raised an issue in this criminal litigation about, well, he was actually still president at that moment when he left. So it wasn't an unlawful taking because as president, he still had lawful access to all those documents. So there is that. The other problem of DC is the DC district has some legacy cases that have had not great rulings on this issue of venue choice by prosecutors. And finally, there is a current Supreme Court case that really changes the outlook on this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so if prosecutors bring a case somewhere on a theory of venue that is later proven wrong, typically the remedy for that is the case gets dismissed, but then the prosecutors can re-indict the case in the correct venue. So this is a little bit complicated because you could lose the venue motion as a prosecutor either during the trial on a jury determination, because it is actually a question for the jury, or you could lose it on a motion hearing, right? The defendant files a motion and then the judge decides whether or not you're in the right venue. Well, this Supreme Court case may just change the remedy in a fundamental way. The case was argued a few weeks ago. It has not been decided yet, but it is possible that this Supreme Court will decide that the proper remedy when a prosecutor brings a case in the wrong venue is complete dismissal with prejudice, which means you can never re-indict that case. So that's another thing that the Jack Smith team has been thinking about. And I think when you stack all those risks up on top of each other in like a big risk sandwich, it just becomes too big to swallow. Even though you're likely to get a less favorable jury in Florida, and even though you probably have not as good of judges to pick from in Florida, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, the prosecutors are probably like, you know what? That's the proper venue. That's where the most of these actions took place, certainly where the obstruction took place. There's no venue challenge there whatsoever. Let's just bring it in Florida. And that's what they did.
Yeah, I agree, and we'll take a look at these charges. We're going to take a quick break, and I want to talk about the venue and the judge as soon as we take this break. We'll be right back, everybody. Stick around. All right, everybody, welcome back. So I think it's ABC that was reporting. Everyone's picked it up and corroborated it now, that the summons has Judge Eileen Cannon's name on it, along with Judge...
You cannot make this stuff up. Holy cow.
With Judge Reinhardt. Judge Reinhardt is the one who issued the search warrant on Mar-a-Lago. So this is where the original case, came from. And I want to talk briefly about Miami is like 2 hours away from Palm Beach.
Yes.
But from what my understanding, I talked to Dave Ehrenberg, who's the DA down there in Palm Beach. I think what's happening, and he hasn't got confirmation on this yet, but I think what's happening is the grand juries are only meeting in Miami in the Southern District right now, not in Palm Beach.
Right.
Because of COVID. They still have restrictions. So that is why the grand jury would be in Miami, because that's the only place in the Southern District of Florida where grand juries are meeting. But the proper venue would be Palm Beach, because that is where Mar-a-Lago is, and that's where this obstruction happened. And so Eileen Cannon. Now, we don't know if it's just the arraignment, the summons, because Donald Trump also put on Truth Social he has to appear Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time in the court down there. So we don't know if it's just for this or if she is the judge on this case. But her name is on this summons. Yeah,
that's right. So we should learn more about this on Tuesday. As I understand it, Palm Beach is a very small federal courthouse. It's kind of like a satellite office of the real federal courthouse in Miami, and there's a very limited number of judges there. I'm not sure that she's the only full bird federal judge. So.
Yeah, there's also Judge Middlebrooks, who
that's right.
found that Trump was judge shopping when he went to look for Eileen Cannon, and I think dismissed that whole case against his lawsuit, and he was the one who put sanctions down for the Trump lawsuit of you and 30 other people.
That's right.
I think that was Middlebrooks as well.
I knew I had some connection to that place.
Yeah,
so there's not a lot of judges there. There's probably a couple of federal magistrate judges, which are lower level judges that usually handle things like arraignments and pretrial motions and stuff like that. But so it's a limited pool once you figure that that's where you're polling from. Now, when it comes to like polling for a jury, the jury pool for that district is not just West Palm, right? It's kind of, the jury duty notices go out by the entirety of the district. So I think the pool is probably more diverse than the pool that you would get from West Palm. Hard to make any clear, confident assumptions about whether they're Trump leaning or not Trump leaning. I mean, that's beyond me, but that's how I understand it.
The Southern District skews Dem. It skews Dem a little bit. But it's certainly not a DC grand jury, as you brought up before.
Yeah.
And if you remember, Eileen Cannon, that was the one who had appointed the special master, got her ass handed to her by the DOJ and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Very kind of embarrassing. They had to vacate her twice on things that she decided. So, Joyce Vance is saying on Twitter that there's a possibility that there could be a motion for her to recuse if she doesn't automatically. She says that the 11th Circuit probably is not going to want to go through this again. The district court there is not going to want this to be done wrongly. So there might be a chance for that if she is the judge that's assigned to this case. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. But that's, for now, all we know is her name and Reinhardt's name have appeared on the summons for Trump to come back in on Tuesday at 3. That's really all we know for now.
Quite frankly, my biggest concern about Cannon, if she stays on the case, is not this question of bias so much as it is a question of competence. Her ruling in the special master lawsuit, actually, is what it was just so preposterously wrong, so obviously wrong on so many counts. It was contrary to the current state of the law. It was poorly reasoned. And that's why she got shelled by the appeals court. And if I'm correct, a majority of the 3 judges, at least 2 of those 3 judges, were also Trump appointees, pretty conservative judges who just kind of shut her down. So it's really hard for prosecutors and for defense attorneys to have to try a big, important case in front of a judge who's not one of the better judges on the bench, because you lose the ability to predict where the judge would rule on any given motion that you're thinking about. Someone who's just kind of a, out
loose
there,
cannon, right?
loose cannon, exactly, unpredictable, not really very closely tied to the law, not known for like really well-reasoned arguments and things like that. It just kind of throws the whole thing into chaos, and that ultimately has an impact on how the lawyers make decisions about what sort of issues to bring and what positions to take. And so it can really throw a lot of uncertainty into the process, which is not good for anyone.
No, 100%. But we'll keep you posted on what we learn. Like you said, we'll probably learn more Tuesday during that arraignment summons, whatever it is. So let's talk about these charges. Let's talk about the indictment of Donald Trump and Walt Nauta, as we've just learned. ABC News lists 7 crimes. Now, I want to kind of be clear here. Crimes are not the same as counts. The first reporting we were getting was this was a 7-count indictment. Mm-hmm. Now we're learning it's actually 7 statutes that were violated. And some of these statutes, like 793E, I'll go over this list here in a second, you can usually get 1 count per document in some of these instances. So there could be multiple counts on any of these instances of the crimes that are listed. So I think we're looking at probably more than a 7-count indictment. I don't think that there's going to just be 1 count for each of these crimes, but who knows? Who knows? We'll see. My guess is it's probably around, if they're bringing in every single document they found, I mean, there could be 300 counts in here, unless but they group them together so that it's not so bulky. Especially under 793E. But aside from, we'll talk about that in a second, but aside from 793E, willful retention of national defense information, there's 1512K. Now, I've been harping on 1519. Mm-hmm. There's witness tampering obstruction in here. 1512K is conspiracy to obstruct justice. And I tweeted out last night, friendly reminder, it takes 2 to conspire. And then we get the Walt Nauta.
It takes 2, and one of them can't be a government agent.
Yes, very good. 1512B2A, withholding a document or record. 1512C1, corruptly concealing a document or record. And then 1519 is on here too. That's the concealing a document from a federal investigation. That's the one that we were all thinking of for obstruction in this case. And then 1001A1 and A2. Those are false statements and schemes to conceal. Now, I wanted to ask you about this because I was kind of surprised when Jim Trusty, who, by the way, just resigned from the legal team.
The latest in a long history and tradition of rotating legal counsels on this case and every other Trump case.
Yeah, and he told someone on the news that there was a 1512 charge in here. As somebody's defense attorney. That just blows my mind. But, we could talk about the lawyer rotating door blunderdome in a second, but 1512 is about witness tampering. Here's what it says. Causing another person to withhold testimony or a document. That's B2A. That's 1512 B2A. So it's not, the way that ABC listed is withholding a document. No, it's actually causing another person to withhold a document or record or testimony. Then C1, 1512 C1, is altering, destroying, mutilating, concealing a record, document, or other object, or an attempt to do so, specifically pool water. No, they don't list pool water. With the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in an official proceeding. And maybe I'm reading into the pool story a little too much, but that fits really well. If they conspired to drain that server room to destroy surveillance tapes, and somebody can testify to that that's cooperating, like the guy who did it, because remember, it wasn't Nauta.
Yeah.
That would be very interesting. But it could also be something as simple as concealing these classified records so that they can't be used against you in a court of law.
That's right. Alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object, or attempts to do so with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in official proceeding. I mean, that could be just as simple as the documents moving around that we have on the video surveillance.
Could be the Iran document. They said that they couldn't find it. Maybe they know that they have it, or they're hiding it, or they destroyed it. Maybe it could be so many things, and we're not going to know. It's fun to speculate, but we are not going to know until they unseal that indictment.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Jim Trusty is out now, and so is the other guy. They're replacing him with we went over this a little earlier in the week on the Daily Beans. This guy named Todd Blanche, but what do you think? They say they resigned. I'm wondering because now, I mean, we've been seeing after Parlatore resigned, he's been on cable news blabbing his mouth about this case all the time. And now we've got, like you said, and I know George Conway tweeted about this, how, I don't know if people understand how bonkers it is that a defense attorney who is still on a case, as he was last night, would go on TV and talk about crimes in an indictment that he hasn't seen yet.
It's bizarre. It's so crazy. When you're under investigation, of course, your attorney, any decent attorney would advise you, keep your mouth shut, and the attorney would do the same. Now, I get it. This is like the worst client of all time to have to represent Donald Trump. He doesn't ever keep quiet about anything. But that desire to kind of really maintain messaging discipline is amplified 100-fold when you know you're going to get indicted. And here we are on the eve of the indictment. They don't know what's in it. They don't know what facts are going to be alleged. They don't know what actions are going to be called out as criminal. And you've got the president's prime attorney, Jim Trusty, on the networks, mine included, making these just incredibly detailed comments about what did or didn't happen and what DOJ did or didn't do. It's just, it's totally unnecessary, and it's taking all kinds of risks. You're creating risk for your client rather than mitigating risk. And it's crazy to see.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How does it create risk instead of mitigating it? Because it seems to me kind of like when Mike Sherwin went out and started talking about conspiracy, seditious conspiracy charges for Oath Keepers. It seemed like they were honestly just trying to tank the case or give it a really good appealable thing by going out and talking about charges ahead of time. And I could see some sort of you tainting the jury pool, but it's his lawyers that are doing it. I don't. How's it worse for Trump than it is better that these guys are out here blabbing?
Well, in the least case, you're going to get you're not going to go out and talk in any way other than in defense of the client, right? So you're going to say things that are going to either explicitly announce or maybe just kind of refer to or echo the actual defenses you're going to use at trial. So you are potentially previewing your defenses for the prosecution, and that is not a good idea. That's strategically just a terrible thing to do. You also, there was a moment in his CNN interview last night when Trusty was asked by Caitlin Collins, what did Trump say when you got the target letter? What did Trump say when he realized he's going to be indicted? And Trusty then explained kind of what Trump said about it. You could imagine a scenario in which the lawyer relating what the client said in his presence could potentially violate attorney-client privilege. I mean, what if that interaction becomes material in some way? If there later is information developed that, like, you know, Trump made some sort of admission or some factual statement that's relevant to the case, you could go in and argue like, well, that's not privileged because Trustee sat on national television and related the conversation. I know that seems a little bit far-fetched, but my point is, you don't create any of these risks if you just shut your mouth and say no comment. So I don't know why you wouldn't do that, but there you go. You know, it's a different problem that they are dealing with. And their problem is they have an irascible, demanding, self-absorbed, imperious client. And I am quite confident that their marching orders were, get out there and defend me, because that's the only thing that matters to Trump is how things appear on television vis-a-vis him. Right. And I would expect that order also went to his former attorney, Parlatore, who technically doesn't even work for him anymore, but he's out there doing that. He was on the panel.
Yeah. That's why I said. And now I'm sure that's what Jim Trusty will be doing as well. Yeah. But now they've got Todd Blanche. And that's for both cases, by the way, or I should say all, because we know there's like 4 or 5 different arms of this investigation. But it's going to be Todd Blanche, and we talked about him earlier on the Beans. I guess he's pretty good. Like, he's probably the most reasonable lawyer that whose credentials I've looked at that has worked for this team outside of like Chris Keyes. Yeah. So
Blanche is the real deal, and he's got great experience. He has from what I understand, a terrific reputation. I think he's also known as a guy who's not going to get on TV, which is a good thing for that team. I mean, Trump needs a really good lawyer, experienced, integrity, good, trial chops, and someone who's going to conduct himself in a way that's only for Trump's benefit. And he might have found that guy in Todd Blanche. Now, on the downside, Blanche also has the Manhattan DA case, which is coming up. I think it's set for trial in March, right? Next March. So these things are going to be in prep, really intense trial prep, basically at the same time. We don't have a trial schedule for this the federal indictment yet, but we'll be hearing about that in the next few weeks. So that's a lot for one lawyer to do.
Florida goes a lot faster than DC too, because we don't have the 1,000 cases of additional 1,000 cases for January 6th going through the same docket.
That's right.
Down in Miami. All right, we're going to be right back. We still have more. We still have more stuff to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. One last story on the documents case, and then another quick 1-6 story will be done. But CNN today read the transcript of the audio of Donald waving the Milley document around. Remember the 2021 meeting with the book reporters and the aide that was recording? Well, they got the transcript, and I just want to read some of this to you, and I want to get your top line thoughts, Andrew, because this is what he says. Okay, I'm reading what his words are, and quote: "Well, with Milley, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't that amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look, this was him." This is in the transcript. He goes on to say, "They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was Milley. This was the Defense Department and him. We looked at some. This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him." And then he went on to say, "All sorts of stuff, pages long. Look, wait a minute. Let's see here. I just found this. Isn't this amazing? This totally wins my case, Except it's like highly confidential, secret. This is a secret information. Look at this." And then he went on to say, "I didn't classify this when I was president. I can't declassify it now." And that is what went. And so it's everything we thought, everything we assumed that went on in that conversation. Now we have the transcript of it.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And reading the transcript, it's so much more impactful than it was just talking about it a week ago. Now imagine hearing the tape, which is what the jury's going to get. They're going to get to hear that conversation. That is going to be really a key moment in the trial of this case eventually. But I think it's really important context to know that he's talking to these reporters and he's basically trying to respond to these comments about Millie that came out of a New Yorker article in which Millie allegedly told the author, or somebody on Millie's behalf told the author, that Millie had to kind of pull Trump back from the edge of wanting to bomb Iran. And so this whole exchange from Trump is him showing or referring to this document, which in his mind proves the opposite. Like, Millie gave me this document. This document is like the war plan or options for bombing Iran. So therefore, he's a liar, right? He was the one that was pushing me to go against Iran, not me against him. Whatever. The whole thing is crazy. But while he's making these statements, this stuff that you just read, like, they presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. He can be heard on the tape to be like waving or brandishing, showing papers, like a stack of papers in his hand. So that raises the specter that the actual document was there in his hand while he was talking to these people without security clearances at Bedminster. And then, of course, at the very end, he says, look at this. So did he show them what was in his hand? Was it the actual document? Because taking that step of actually displaying it elevates this to a much more serious criminal charge. So if this episode becomes the source of one of the criminal charges in the indictment, this is very, very damning evidence against the former president.
Yeah, I agree. And it's always interesting that these transcripts eventually get to us and we get to see them. All right, I want to combine listener question with our last story. How about that? So if you have a listener question, you can send it to us at hello@MullerSheWrote.com. Put Jack in the subject line. And this is from Nancy. And Nancy wants to know about the higher-ups in sedition cases. I would like to know when they're going to be getting the actual plotters and planners, e.g. the Willard Hotel War Room guys, the House members, and Ted Cruz. So I wanted to ask this question because our last story is that now Steve Bannon has been subpoenaed in the Jack Smith January 6th investigation. And he was there at the Willard War Room. So he's looking into this. But what my question is why now? It seems like it's been a really long time. Why are they just now subpoenaing Bannon? What are your thoughts, Andy?
You know, there's the kind of typical, the reflexive answer to that question is they've been working their way up, and now they've put, they have the Lincoln logs in place, the pieces they needed to kind of build toward this moment with Bannon. Maybe other witnesses have told them more about what Bannon did or what he said or where he was.
Because you don't just bring him in. You have to get all the evidence for every question that you're going to ask him before you subpoena him.
That's exactly right. For that moment of finally sitting down and talking to Bannon, who's never going to cooperate, right? He's going to be a very wily, problematic witness. You want to know everything you can possibly know before you sit down with him on the record so that when he starts lying to you, you can confront him with facts and expose the fact that he's lying. So that would be my guess. It's taken them a while to get to a place where they're really ready to sit down and have a kind of a confrontational interview with him.
Well, at some point he'll be in prison. He's awaiting a 4-month prison sentence for his criminal contempt of Congress once his appeal is decided.
And it'll be much easier to schedule because you won't have anything else to do. That's what I'm saying.
We know exactly where he's going to be at least for 4 months. Do you think they'll give him 3 prison jumpsuits so he can continue to wear his layers? I don't know.
The layers of jumpsuits. I hadn't thought about that, but they should. Maybe he'll file a motion that they violated his constitutional right to multiple layered clothing if they don't.
Yeah, he would. That's something I think. Yeah, I can't go to jail. There's only one jumpsuit. All right, everybody. There's going to be a lot more news coming out this week. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Again, if you have a question, you can send it to us at hello@MullerSheWrote.com. Just put Jack in the subject line. Do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here on this weekend, Andy?
I mean, my mind is a blur. It's been a lot in the last day or so, and I've got a long way to go today. But yeah, I think this is really the sort of developments that we've been thinking about for a while. So it's exciting stuff. And we have a lot to talk about, so I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yes, always happy when justice happens. Thank you so much, my friend. We'll see you next week on Jack.